Our next speaker flew to Toronto last night just to give this keynote address. So I'm going to ask everyone very directly today to give your full attention to the front and keep side conversations to a minimum. And if you can't, please leave the room and have those conversations outside. Our next speaker is Jeff Olivet. And I didn't meet him until about an hour ago, so I had to find a way to tell you a story about him. I was told that Mel and Steve have been collaborating with Jeff for a number of years on groundbreaking work in the US, and in particular, Jeff led the Federal Homelessness Prevention Framework. I was told by Melanie that Jeff is, quote, woke AF, and he is, quote, a cool dude. And after meeting him, I can corroborate that we will have a good time at this plenary. Youth homelessness work is at a crossroads, and tremendous work has been done in recent years to understand youth and young adult homelessness, develop creative responses, and move upstream to prevent youth homelessness before it starts. Yet in many countries, backlash against 2S LGBTQ rights and racial equity have presented challenges for programs that serve at-risk and homeless young people. This talk from one of the leading experts on homelessness policy in the US and internationally will explore these challenges and offer hope for the journey ahead. Today, we are pleased to welcome Jeff Olivet, the former executive director of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, a current senior advisor to Chapin Hall, and a current senior advisor with the Initiative on Health and Homelessness at the Harvard School of Public Health. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. I was warned that you guys are so excited to be together in this space that you might talk through my entire keynote today. Is that right or not? No? I'm gonna let you go ahead and get it out of your system real quick. What I'd like you to do is just think for a moment on why you chose to be here. You could be anywhere. You could be anywhere in the world right now. And yet you chose to be in this room, in this space, with these people, having these important conversations. Why did you choose to be here? Then I'd like you to turn to somebody next to you and just have a quick conversation about that. Why did you choose to be here? I say this at the risk of you never getting your attention back to the front of the room, but we're going to do it anyway. Have a quick conversation. Why are you here? And just take another 30 seconds or so to share that, maybe 30 more seconds. All right, now I've got one other question for you to consider. I've got kindergarten tricks if I need them. If you can hear me clap once, if you can hear me clap twice, if you can hear me clap 3 times. You guys are fantastic. You're fantastic, thank you. Here's the other question I have for you is, how long have you been in this work of combating youth homelessness? Whether you are a young person with lived experience, whether you're a service provider, an outreach worker, a social worker, if you're a researcher or a policymaker or the head of an organization, how long have you been in this work? If you've been in this work less than a year, stand up. Less than a year, stand up. I know you're eating lunch. There got to be more people than that. All right, let's welcome them to our movement here. How about 1 to 5 years? Maybe you got a great new job in January 2020. Then the pandemic hit. Stand up, 1 to 5 years. Excellent. Take a seat. How about 5 to 10 years? If you've been in this work, you used to be a young person and now you're not. I don't know. All right, let's keep going with this. 10 to 20 years. If you've been in this work in that 10 to 20 year window, Melanie, Jeff, others. And I guess this is the last one I'll ask. How about more than 20 years in the work of fighting youth homelessness? Whether you've been in this work 2 months, 2 years, 20 years, 32 years, we need you here. Whether you've had lived experience of homelessness yourself, or whether you've come at it as an ally and an activist and someone in solidarity with young people, we need you here. We need all of these voices. I've been in this work for 32 years. I first started in homelessness work in 1993 in Nairobi, Kenya. And I just learned a few minutes ago that 32 years means that was before Marty was born, which is troublesome. So I've been in homelessness work for 1 Marty. That's how we'll go with that. I've spent the last several years in government. I was the Biden-Harris administration's point person on homelessness in the United States. And I was in a lot of rooms with elected officials, with cabinet secretaries, with governors and mayors and people with a lot of power. And what I noticed was that it was very easy for those conversations to be disconnected from conversations like this one, from conversations that are going on back in your community with young people sitting around tables trying to advise policy, with outreach workers out in the street connecting with people where they are. And when I was in that role over the last several years, one thing that kept me grounded was the fact that I had been an outreach worker. I had worked with young people experiencing homelessness in the 90s, first in Kenya, then in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the United States. And that experience kept me grounded. It kept me remembering why this work was important and what was it about. But that was a long time ago. And so I also made an effort to be with young people out in the community. And I sat with youth advisory boards, I sat with peer outreach workers, I sat with people in recovery themselves, young people who were currently experiencing the crisis of homelessness, and I tried to listen and learn as much as I could. And that really kept me grounded. And those experiences of doing direct service with young people out in the street, in the shelters, in the drop-in centers, and then meeting with young people over the last few years and hearing their wisdom and their passion and their experience, I learned a lot of things. And I wanted to share a couple of those with you. The first thing I learned was to meet people where they are. And that's, when you're an outreach worker, that's very literal. You go to where people are. If somebody's living under a bridge, you go to a bridge. If somebody's living in a motel for the night, you go to the motel. You go to the drop-in center, the shelter. If somebody's doubled up with someone, you literally meet people where they are. But you also meet people where they are in their journey. And we know that when somebody's experiencing the trauma of homelessness, those are often the darkest days of that person's life. And there's some pretty dark days for people who've experienced homelessness. And so we meet people in that dark moment. And as someone who had never experienced homelessness myself, I came to the work with a lot of humility and with a lot of desire to be a good ally, but without the experience of knowing what that was like. And so the best I could do is be with people and walk beside people through some of those dark days. And what I learned was that there's real power in meeting people where they are. The second thing I've learned is that it is critical that we listen and learn from young people who are closest to the problem. Brian Stevenson, with the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, talks about getting proximate to the problem. You got to get close to it. And if we're sitting in organizational boardrooms making decisions about young people, if we're sitting in the halls of Parliament making decisions behind closed doors that affect young people experiencing homelessness, if we've got foundation leaders and staff in philanthropy making decisions about people, and those folks aren't at the table, we're going to get the policies wrong, we're going to get the decisions wrong, we're going to get the budgets wrong. There's a statement in the mental health recovery movement that says, "Nothing about us without us." That's true in youth homelessness too. Young people need to be at every single table, every single decision, every single conversation that affects their lives. Another thing that I learned was that we build solidarity through partnership. You build relationship, and then you make change happen together. And the real power of advocacy, of activism, is when you take all of that collective wisdom, that collective power, that collective energy, and you drive it towards a legislative change, towards an initiative, towards the amazing work that you all are doing in this room and across Canada and across the globe. That's where the real power happens, and it happens in solidarity. I want to talk a little bit about the times we're living in now. So those were some lessons I've learned along the way from young people. But we are living in some really tough times. I live south of the border in the United States, and it has been a tumultuous month and a half, and it's going to keep being tumultuous. And many of you may be in parts of the world where there's political upheaval, where you're impacted by immigration from parts of the world where people are experiencing war and poverty and oppression and destitution, and they're coming to countries like Canada or the UK or the US or Australia for something better, for safety, for connection, for a new life. And yet we live in a time of real anger and hatred. UN Habitat convened a group in Nairobi in 2021 around ending youth homelessness, and that group, among other things, stated that youth homelessness needs to be fully recognized as a violation of several human rights, including the right to adequate housing. Isn't that a powerful statement? Another powerful statement comes out of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And my country south of the border isn't great about signing on to international conventions, but some of us still embrace the values. This is what Article 27 of the Convention on Rights of the Child says, that states shall, in case of need, provide material assistance and support programs, particularly with regard to nutrition, clothing, and housing. It's there. It's there in the UN Declaration on Human Rights. It's there in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and yet we don't live it out in so many countries. We're living in a time of attacks on immigrants. We see in Germany and France and England and the United States. We're living in a time of attacks on trans people. We're living in a time where it feels like the kindness and compassion has faded, where there's a lot of vitriol, there's a lot of blaming, there's a lot of finger pointing at the other political party or at people experiencing poverty and homelessness. And what that's translated into in the United States lately is criminalization of homelessness. And that's a pretty ugly deal. How many of you are seeing trends towards criminalization where you are? I think it's happening not only in the US, but in other countries as well. I had the very strange experience of sitting in the US Supreme Court the day that they were hearing the oral arguments for the Grants Pass, Oregon case, which made it legal for cities to arrest people, to jail people, to fine people, simply because they didn't have a place to stay. I think I saw Michael Santos at the Supreme Court that day. I saw him across the room there a few minutes ago. We're on a bad trajectory in a lot of ways. And the result of that is that, the thing said I was going to offer some hope too, right? We'll get there. We will get there. And none of this is anything new to you. You all know these realities. What this translates into is the fact that far too many young people in far too many communities across the globe are forced to experience the horrors and the trauma of homelessness. And I've believed this for the 32 years I've been in this work, that it is never okay for even one young person to be homeless for even one night. It's not acceptable. I also believe that we can do better. I wasn't part of those conversations about why you chose to be here today, but my guess is that many of you chose to be here because you believe that it's possible to end homelessness. And let's take that a step further. You believe that it's possible to prevent it before it happens. What an outrageous assertion. But it's on that belief that we ground our work. We know the causes of homelessness are complex. There are some people who try to overly simplify it and say just if we had enough affordable housing for all, we wouldn't have homelessness, which is true in a certain way, but all of us need support too. And we don't always do a good job at the wraparound supports that keep people housed, that keep people from becoming homeless in the first place. We don't always do a good job at the intersectional stuff. And so you see people becoming homeless after they've been in child welfare and foster care systems, after they've been in jail and prison, after they've been in mental health and drug and alcohol treatment programs, because we're not doing a good job communicating across those systems and sharing the collective responsibility for preventing homelessness among young people. The troublesome trends that we see continue to be that discrimination against LGBTQ people and people of color continues to drive high rates of homelessness among youth of color and LGBT youth. I am especially troubled by the attacks on trans people in the United States and elsewhere right now. I think it is incredibly harmful, it's inhumane, and it's a harbinger of more attacks on more people. I think there are folks on the right who are testing the water with a particularly vulnerable population to see if then they can start taking that to others as well. We also know that structural racism continues to drive very high rates of homelessness among youth of color. A number of years ago, Chapin Hall, which is the organization that I'm working with as an advisor these days, my colleague Mallory is here from Chapin Hall. The Voices of Youth count in the United States a few years ago found incredibly high rates of homelessness among youth of color. Something like 9 out of 10 young people who are becoming homeless in the US identified as youth of color, and well over half identified as LGBTQ+. These trends play out across the globe. In Australia, almost a quarter of the homeless population are between 12 and 24 years old. 3 in 10 people experiencing homelessness are under 18, and 36% were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. This was from a survey in 2023 and 24. And yet, only half of the children who needed a shelter bed were able to get one. In France and the Netherlands, about 1/4 of the homeless population is between 18 and 29, a lot of young adults, and we're seeing that as a fast-growing group in many countries. In Brazil, 72% of street children are boys between 12 and 17. In the UK, there are more than 130,000 young people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. And I had the opportunity to meet Emma last night, who's with the New Horizon Youth Center in Camden Town in London, doing incredible work to serve some of those young people. In Ireland, a 5-year spike in youth homelessness, where youth homelessness was increased by 57%, led to the development of a youth homelessness strategy as part of the nation's Housing for All effort. South of the border, we think we're exceptional. We like to be number one at a lot of stuff. we're exceptionally bad on youth homelessness. The same study I cited earlier, Voices of Youth, found that 1 in 10 young adults in the United States, age 18 to 25, experienced homelessness at some point in the course of a year. 1 in 10. And 1 in 30 minors between the ages of 13 and 17 experienced some kind of a homelessness. So the picture is tough, right? I'm not telling you anything new, but if we don't come at that with eyes wide open, if we don't come at that armed with the facts to have hard conversations with funders and with elected officials and with others, then we're going to keep knocking along. It does not make me happy or proud to say that I've been in this work longer than Marty's been alive. It makes me, I'm sorry, that's the last time. I'll do it. It makes me profoundly sad. When I got into this work, we talked a lot about working ourselves out of a job. Talked a lot about it. We said homelessness is new. In the United States, we said Ronald Reagan created it, which is not exactly true, but it's a piece of the picture. But it's hard coming at this work year after year and seeing the problems increase, not get better. And yet, at the same time, there is incredible reason for hope. And I am hopeful being in this room. I arrived yesterday afternoon, and I've been able to pop into a couple of the sessions and meet with a number of you. And I am incredibly hopeful by the power and the energy that's in this room. I am also grounded in a deep belief that it's possible to end homelessness, that it doesn't have to be this way. And the reason I know that is because we have solved homelessness in the time I've been in this work over and over and over. Most of the people who are homeless aren't homeless forever. It's not a type of person. It's not like there are the homeless and there's the non-homeless. It's a housing situation. It's a state, not a trait. It's not anything about who you are. It's that you happen to not have a roof over your head right now. And so when you think about people's experiences of homelessness, often that's brief. Sometimes it's longer. Sometimes people are in and out of homelessness. But I have known too many people who were in a very dark place, who had lost hope for themselves. Sometimes on dark days, I had lost hope for them. And I've seen them reconnect with family and friends and housing and school and work and meaningful roles in the community. And their homelessness has been ended permanently. We've seen that over and over and over. So we know it's possible to end homelessness because you all do it every single day. Now, the question is, how do we scale up those efforts to meet the need? And how do we turn off the faucet into homelessness? Because imagine 20 years ago, 32 years ago, 40 years ago, we had put in place effective homelessness prevention strategies. There might still be a few people who slip through the cracks, but we could have a response system that gets them housed very, very quickly. What we didn't do was turn off the faucet. What we did was to create an increasingly effective emergency room. If you think about hospitals, there's an emergency room, right? How many of you have been to the emergency room? I have broken ankles. I've put blades in my arms and legs. I end up in emergency rooms routinely. That sounds worse than it is, but I spent a lot of time in emergency departments. Now imagine a health system here in Canada, or the national health system in the UK, or our broken down, crazy ass health system in the United States. And imagine all we had was emergency rooms. How would that work for obesity? How would that work for depression or diabetes or asthma? How would it work for chronic pain or hospice care or what happens when you get older? How would it work for long-term treatment of cancer? We don't do that. We've got a primary care system that helps people stay healthy. We've got an emergency system that's there when they need help because they're in crisis. And then we've got long-term care that keeps people stabilized over time. And yet we've not done that around homelessness very well. We've put a lot of energy into this middle part, the emergency response. And then I think we've gotten better at the housing and services that help people exit homelessness. But it's only been in the last few years, in large part because of the work that you all are doing here in Canada, that we've begun to understand what it would take to turn off the faucet into homelessness. And that is powerful work, and that's why you all are here. As Peter said this morning in the plenary, you all get it. You're here because you understand prevention, because you believe in prevention. That has not always been the case. There have been conversations in my part of the world, and I'm sure in your part of the world as well, where people are like, well, we can't do prevention. We're so busy with the crisis, which is true in some ways. We don't want to overstretch the people who are doing the crisis work. We certainly don't want to divide the small pie differently to stop doing the crisis work so that we go upstream. We need new funding streams. We need new people. We need new partnerships with other systems to be able to do that upstream work. And so this is both and. It's not either or. And there's often been this dichotomy of either or thinking when it comes to prevention. There are so many good things to be hopeful about. You know, when I got into youth homelessness work, we didn't have much. We had outreach and we had shelter. And there just wasn't much else going on. There wasn't much. Housing First didn't exist. Rapid rehousing didn't exist. Short-term subsidies, direct cash transfers, peer-to-peer models, all of the incredible work that you all do every day has really grown up in the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So we've got a much more sophisticated set of tools to use. That gives me incredible hope. The conversation that I got to listen in on a little bit around family and natural supports is such a critical part of what's going on here. Throwing money at a subsidy is a critical part of the puzzle, but if we're not connecting with people as human beings, if we're not helping people rebuild a fabric of social network and connection and love and friendship and family, whether that's a family you're born into or a family that you choose and nurture, then we're only solving half the problem. And so these things are giving me incredible hope. The work around prevention, well, I am blown away that there are 600 of you in this room today. We got to bring everybody else along with that. This is still the new frontier in a lot of ways, here in Canada and across the globe. This is the new direction, and you all are right at the tip of that spear in doing that work. A couple of other things to point to around prevention. Chapin Hall released the New Opportunities Prevention Strategy last summer. That's an excellent resource to look at. When I was in the United States government, we did a number of things on homelessness prevention. When we came into office, we put a new federal strategic plan in place that led with a prevention pillar in that strategy. It also had a very strong focus on racial equity, on LGBTQ equality, on protection for people with disabilities. I am deeply concerned and watch with heartbreak as the current US administration rolls back much of that work, but the work continues out in the world with groups like this in the United States and across the country. We released a national research strategy that included a very strong focus on youth homelessness, but also youth homelessness prevention. I would encourage you to look at that. That document's called From Evidence to Action. And then in the fall of last year, we put out a federal framework on homelessness prevention. And I heard mentioned in the plenary this morning that there's not been a shared vocabulary about what we mean when we talk about levels of prevention, whether something's universal or targeted or focused on at-risk groups. What we were trying to do with that framework was to take a kind of public health framing of this issue and give people some language to talk about this. So I'd encourage you to look at that as well. What I believe is that the youth homelessness sector is showing the way for the rest of the homelessness movement. And I've believed this for a long time. I think if you look at what's happened around youth voice and youth leadership on youth action boards and paid expert positions and research studies that include young people with lived experience as part of the research team, we have seen a real upswell of youth power over the last decade that was just not true before that. There were a whole lot of decisions being made about people without them in the room, and I see less and less of that. And what I've seen is that that has then taught folks who are working with family homelessness, with veteran homelessness, with older adult homelessness, oh, we better do that too. We better get people with lived experience at these tables and recognize the deep, deep expertise that they bring. So the youth movement has led that shift. I believe the youth movement is leading that shift on prevention as well. And so when you contemplate your work heading away from here this week, after you've been in this incredible environment with each other, learning and sharing and getting energized about the work that you do, when you take that forward into your communities, you're not only changing your community, you're not only making things better for the young people experiencing homelessness or who would have experienced homelessness if not for your efforts, you're changing the entire system. You're changing how it works for older adults, for young moms, for single adults with disabilities, because everybody else is watching what you're doing. And there's incredible power in that. And I want you to just sort of keep that in mind, that you're part of something much larger than yourself. So I really do believe that the youth homelessness movement is showing the way for the rest of the efforts to fight homelessness. The other thing I believe is that if we don't prevent youth homelessness, we will never end youth homelessness. Make sense? Right? You could end homelessness today for every young person without a roof over their head in Toronto, and tomorrow there'd be more. This is logical. You're already on board with this. The other piece of this is that if we don't solve youth homelessness, we will never solve all homelessness. And what I mean by that is when I was an outreach worker, I worked with young people, but I was also working with older adults. I was working with single men with a lot of substance use and mental health issues. And I would meet a 45-year-old who'd been homeless for 15 years, living on the streets, so-called chronic homelessness, not a term I like. And you'd talk with them about how they became homeless or when they became homeless. And she might say, I don't even know how to answer that. I guess the first time I was homeless, I was 13. Next time I was homeless, I was 18. I was out of the system and on my own. And what you see is this cycle that so often starts in childhood, starts in adolescence, and carries on into adulthood. And so I believe this, however you define the age group, but this sort of 13 to 25 or 14 to 24 or 15 to 30, whatever this window is of youth and young adulthood, is the critical moment of intervention. For that individual, you can change a life's course by providing housing and stability and reconnection for people. On a societal level, an epidemiological level, a population level, if we can solve youth homelessness, we're solving all homelessness for the long term. We're creating a pathway to a time when we don't have any homelessness, when those cycles are broken. And that's the work that you all are doing here. If you can prevent it before it happens at a critical moment in someone's development, you're making sure they're not homeless 20 years from now. That is powerful, powerful work. So where does that leave us? Now, more than ever, in the face of the hatred and the vitriol and the anti-trans rhetoric that we see, the anti-immigrant rhetoric that we see, the policies that are in place that are harming people, in spite of that, in the face of that, now more than ever, we need to listen to young people. Now more than ever, we must fight bigotry, racism, homophobia, and transphobia. Now more than ever, in all of your cities, all of your nations, we must hold our leaders' feet to the fire of justice and hold them accountable so that every ounce of the support needed to end youth homelessness is there. Now more than ever, we got to come together across the political spectrum, across age, across race, across gender identity, across sexual orientation, across national boundaries to make housing a human right for everybody. Now more than ever, we must work to prevent homelessness for young people. When that doesn't work, we need to shorten the length of time they're homeless. You got to reduce the harm. You got to make it days, not weeks, not months, not years. And we've got to provide people the support they need to exit homelessness. This work will lead us into a new and bright future. And finally, now more than ever, we must fight hatred with love, fear with hope, and the trauma of homelessness with the light of housing justice. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for being here. Keep up your good work.